Hey, Cincinnati haters, how you doing today? I just wanted to say hi and tell you that Cincinnati absolutely 100% belongs. Now, I'm not a Cincinnati fan per se, but I do think teams like Central Florida, Boise State, Utah, back when Urban Meyer was their coach, I believe it was also the year that Alex Smith was there as a senior, if I remember correctly. A laundry list of other teams should have had an opportunity long before Cincinnati. And I'll tell you right now, the committee, I really believe, was juggling whether or not they were even going to let Cincinnati in. I think if Oklahoma State would have won and Georgia would have lost, we would have seen a Big 12 champion in over Cincinnati. I think they would have moved Oklahoma State up and they would have moved Cincinnati back. But their hand was forced in this occasion. Look, Cincinnati being in the college football playoff cannot be any worse than OU getting dusted in 3 out of 4 of their playoff games. It can't be any worse than Michigan State not even scoring one damn point in their playoff game. Can't be any worse than Washington losing by 17. So if Cincinnati does happen to get blown out when they play in their college football playoff game, literally their location will have nothing to do with it because that's been proven by literally every other conference out there. And it's also been proven by Clemson, who has won national titles but has also been beat up real bad in a national championship game. You're either good or you're not. And that's really all there is to it. And that's all the bottom line is ever going to be. So if you have a problem with Cincinnati being in and you think Notre Dame or Oklahoma State or Baylor or anybody else should be in, understand that Cincinnati earned the right. They are the only undefeated football team in the NCAA, if I remember correctly. Bottom line to all this is there's 131 teams in college football. You mean to tell me it should be 4 anyways? Look, if it was a 12 or 16 playoff, absolutely, we would always see a Cincinnati or Central Florida or somebody in there. They'd have to be because not only would they be undefeated, but they'd be a conference champion. So they'd have to get in with at least, a 9 or 10 ranking, something, right? But that's not the way that it is right now. And I do not agree with telling somebody going undefeated is just not good enough. Didn't Central Florida beat up on an Auburn team? Didn't Central Florida also beat a Baylor team? Didn't look, Houston was 12-1. People said they were overrated, whooped up real good on a Florida State football team. Now, was it the best football team that Florida State has ever fielded? I think they were 9-3 that season. No, of course not. But people said they weren't good enough, and then the next year they turned around and beat OU when they weren't even good that season. Houston wasn't, I should say. So for anybody to sit around and talk about how all these teams just are never going to be equal, it's nonsense. And it's really a bunch of old heads voting on all this stuff that don't need to be voting in the first place. All right? Because they're so wrapped up in tradition that they can't even see past a lot of those teams were great 20 years ago, but they're not now. And don't talk to me about the weakness of the conference that Cincinnati or Central Florida or anybody else is in when the Big 12 is clearly no better. You got Texas losing to KU. You've got Oklahoma having a hard time with KU football, not basketball, football. You understand? Didn't Baylor lose to TCU? How good is TCU this year? Come on. Wasn't it Baylor that barely beat Texas State or somebody? I mean, come on. The Big 12 is no better or worse than anybody that's playing in the same conference as Houston and Cincinnati. And Houston had won 11 straight games, by the way, at one point this season. Yeah, they lost their opener, a tough one. But the reality of it is Cincinnati did what was necessary. Michigan's only got one win over a top 25 team until they finally won the Big Ten championship, right? So, you weigh it out and you understand that in conference play, sometimes, yeah, those teams are just beating up on each other and those coaches happen to know each other really well. And you've got 3, 4, and 5-year seniors on some of those football teams. And so they just, with film study and all that, they understand tendencies. All right. And so sometimes it's not the same thing as actually being good or bad or having a good or bad conference. But let's be honest. The SEC is being carried by Nick Saban U. That's the bottom line. They are being carried by Nick Saban U. Now, I will concede to either argument that that the SEC West subdivision is probably the best in all of college football, but I'd also be willing to concede to the idea that the entire SEC is being carried by Bama. But if you think Cincinnati doesn't belong, then to me, you just don't understand college football.